Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and thank you for being here with us today. A special thanks to Capital Link and Nicolas Bornozis for organizing this panel, in particular, of distinguished experts in their field to discuss current maritime policy and regulation. Let me present first of all our panelists, although I'm sure you know them already. Next to me I have Mrs. Magda Kopczynska, Director of Waterborne, Directorate General for Mobility and Transport, the European Commission. Next, Mr. Guy Platten, Secretary General of the International Chamber of Shipping. Next to him, Mr. Philippos, President of the European Community of Shipowners Association and CEO of Lemissoler Navigation. Mr. Arsenio Dominguez, Director Marine Enforcement Division of the IMO. And last but not least, Mr. Xylas, Member of the Board of the Union of Greek Shipowners and President and CEO of Ariston Navigation Corp. So if I may begin perhaps with the people who provide the regulations and the policies, and they make the policies. Magda, I'd like to ask you, there are currently a number of regulations coming from, regulating the maritime sector, and especially regarding decarbonization of the maritime sector, both at EU level, national level, and international level. And my question is this really the right approach towards decarbonization of the maritime industry, or are we creating market anomalies and distorting competition by not, through all these regional schemes? What's your view?
Okay. Thank you very much, and big thanks to Capital Link for inviting us here. On top of it being good to be in Athens and to meet with the Greek shipping community, it's actually very, very nice to be in person. We have done similar panels before virtually, but there's no comparison. And questions do not get easier when we do it live, unfortunately. But I don't know actually how much time we have because we are so late. But maybe I think it's the answer is easy and difficult, and we heard it already today in in the earlier panels, that one thing that, well, any sector of economy, but the shipping sector, I think in particular, needs is predictability and long-term legislative stability, and we absolutely fully subscribe to that. It was also good to hear today so much being spoken about the need of the sector to manage the challenge of decarbonization. It came from the industry, it came from the Greek Minister of Shipping. And when you take those two things into consideration, I think we all agree that what we need to do fast is we need to do the regulation. And yes, of course, a global legislative framework is preferred because we are dealing with a global sector. But with all the risks that I'm taking now, on occasions it is easier for some pieces of legislation for a regional entity like the European Union to go faster. We had seen it before. We had seen it with single double hull. We had seen it with other solutions that first happened at the EU level and were then reflected at the IMO level. We had the other situations when IMO went fast and first, and we picked it up and transposed it into European legislation to make sure that in the EU we have a level playing field and we have the same competitive situation for all ships that call at EU port. And in a way what we are doing now, yes, we did come up with a package of proposals, July last year, several of them addressing shipping, saying very clearly what is the EU vision in terms of objectives that shipping has to achieve when it comes to decarbonization. But at the same time, we are working closely with international partners, working closely with the IMO to make sure that we get the global framework for decarbonization as quickly as possible. And I stress again, as quickly as possible. Your ships will need to be changed at some point. The earlier you know for what type of ships you will need to change, the better for you. The earlier the market knows for which type of ships you will be looking, the earlier the market will be ready. The earlier the maritime ecosystem knows what type of fuels need to be there, the earlier those fuels will be there, and fuel producers will deliver them, and fuel infrastructure will be there. So speed is needed, but seriously, the European framework is there, but the moment we will have global framework agreed and in place, we will find ways to make sure that they are adjusted, because neither you, nor I, nor EU member states will agree for ships calling to EU ports to pay double. Thank you.
Thank you, Magda. And since you spoke about global regulation, I think I will ask Arsenio, should the IMO take the lead to come up with implementable regulation on a global scale to establish level playing field? I mean, I'm conscious that currently I hear there are about 45 different regimes internationally. What's the plan?
Thank you, and in echoing Magda's words, so thank you for the organizers for this kind of invitation. It's so much better when we can actually speak to each other face to face, and in particular on these kind of topics I'm quite passionate about. And the answer is yes. That's the mission of the organization, is to bring everyone together. It's a global industry. It needs global frameworks. It needs global regulations. And it's good to hear that even when some other regions or countries may move slightly ahead of the organization, that the objective continues to be the same one, and that at the appropriate time, there will be just one global standard. Because what we don't want is fragmentation within the industry. And this is where on the process, on the regulatory process of the organization, we bring all the stakeholders to the table. It's not just the countries, it's all the shipping industry's representatives. It's the environmental NGOs, organizations. So we are all part of the process. We all look and seek the same goal, the decarbonization of the shipping industry. Looking at the different factors that may affect some regions and countries more than others, and making sure within the UN spirit that we all move forward together and that we provide the necessary assistance to those that may need more than others.
Okay, thank you. Okay, let's hear the view of the ship owners then. John, is the EU trading emissions system or any of the other regulatory measures which we're currently facing, and some of them that are coming up, the answer to the problem? What do you think? If it's not, why, and what should we change? What proposals do you have?
Thank you, Alex, and I would also like to thank the organizers for the invitation. It's very nice to meet in person at last after 2 years. And it's important to gather and exchange views, but I think discussing things between or amongst ourselves is not good enough. I think the message has to be to go further away to the wider audience, not only to the regulators and the politicians and the NGOs and the media, but also to the wider audience, which is the people and the perception that the people have about a lot of those things. Because once it reaches them, it will, conferences like this will make a difference. Now, let me start by saying that, unlike some of my fellow panelists, I do not have an engineering background. I'm an economist by training, so I will have to use some of my notes to answer the questions. As a general comment, I would say that I believe there is a long-term vision in the IMO, and the proposed regulations. And although there are some arguments regarding the pace, some with merit, some without. The EU regulations are regional, and regional regulations are problematic by definition. And I will go to the specific EU ETS that was mentioned earlier and the fuel EU proposals, which in my opinion are unnecessary. And I will give you a few highlights why I think they're problematic and unnecessary. Going to the EU ETS, it has two shortcomings. A, it is regional, and B, it is a trading scheme. It is a land-based system being implemented to an industry that is so different. And especially small to medium enterprises will bear the lion's share of the burden. We at the UGS, the Union of Greek Shipowners, believe a levy system is more appropriate and more effective. And there are 3 points to note here. Firstly, that in order to safeguard sustainability of EU shipping, any proposed legislation by the EU must be compatible with the inherent characteristics of the international shipping industry, while remaining also compatible with the IMO rules and the IMO standards. This is because the viability of EU shipping, which is primarily international and cross-trading, depends on the existence of an effective global regime. Secondly, which I consider very important, the polluter pays principle must be properly implemented. The commercial operator, the actual polluter who determines the cargo carried, who determines the itinerary, the routing, the speed of the ship, must be made responsible for the cost of the compliance with the EU ETS directive. So, according to Eurostat, the EU accounts for around 15% of the world's trade in goods, and it controls about 35% of the fleet. So over half of the fleet is cross-trading, servicing third parties, and this is strategically very important. The majority of that is tramp shipping, which faces additional burden because by nature it does not follow regular routes. Tramp owners do not know when, where, or at which speed the commercial operator will take their ship. So the commercial operator is structurally part of their business. It's not incidentally part of their business. Therefore, he should bear his share of responsibility. Now, in the good news of the day, there has been an increasing number of voices endorsing that view. Recently, BIMCO did so in an update policy statement. And I was reading yesterday an article about the major US commodities giant, Cargill, who also took the same view. Now, obviously, we need research and development, and the money needs to go on developing alternative marine fuels and technologies, and this is only possible through dedicated funds. Now, going to the fuel EU Maritime, I will just say a few words here. Again, I believe this is a problematic proposal. It's regional and with extraterritorial application, as it is especially challenging to consistently source and verify compliance with specified fuel. The availability of the required compliant fuels worldwide is a matter of additional concern, as is the potential distortion of competition between EU and non-EU suppliers and ports. So I think it's highly inappropriate to oblige ships to comply with this proposed regulation instead of EU fuel suppliers, who should be the responsible party for the availability, the distribution, and the supply of appropriate, safe, and fit-for-purpose fuels. The fuel suppliers, though, as we all know, have a stronger voice. They have an effective lobbying capabilities, and therefore a political influence that the shipping industry is lacking. And we have to be frank about that. So the UGS supports the Greek proposal for the legal responsibility to be on the EU marine fuel suppliers, and ships at EU ports, as well as the exclusion of the incoming voyages from the application of this regulation. And I will stop here because I think I've taken too much of your time.
Thank you, John. Philip, John referred to technologies and fuels, as well as research and technologies and, research and development, sorry. How do we decarbonize the maritime industry in an environment without enough clarity as to which technologies and which fuels will prevail, and how important it is focusing on research and development, and what's currently been done on that front?
Thank you, Alexander. I would like also to thank the family Bornozis for keeping inviting me to these panels. $1 million question, Alexander, but what can I say? I think decarbonization has 4 pillars. The first pillar is the technical aspect. The second is the commercial. The third is the regulatory and all the regulations that come into force or they are under discussion now. And the last one, I will borrow a phrase from ICS, is the fourth propulsion revolution, where it refers there to the green alternative fuels, and eventually the way to be burned either through combustion engines or maybe fuel cells, etc. Going now to a little bit to the technical, I think it has been a lot of times said that shipping entered now into the transitional period. I believe shipping entered already 15 years ago in the transitional period. We know that the derating of main engines and the electronic control injection systems are already beginning of the previous decade in force. Every ship delivered after 2013 already has an electronic derated engine, and later on there were also ultra long strong engines. Those engines, they contributed towards actual reduction of the emissions of about 20 to 30%. So shipping has been already in the transition, working not only on technical but on many other aspects. Going now to the commercial aspect, I think there are too many things that the industry is looking or has already implemented, and there is inevitably that the close cooperation between the operators and the shipowners must be there, because only the shipowners cannot determine the speed, the consumption, or the cargo, or whatever else related with the transportation of the cargo. Therefore, I think the cooperation is a must, and it's something that will create the platform where commercially we can manage to gradually reduce the emissions. It is, of course, important to say that a missing part, and maybe IMO should regulate, is the coordination between the ports and the direct communication with the ships in order to achieve the just time. You see how many ships now are under congestion, maybe 1,500, I read recently, 1,500 ships are idle, and these most likely they sail with a speed recently higher speed than the eco speed that we used to have 2020, and we burn and we emitted unnecessarily. I think this communication should be one of your targets as IMO to globally regulate how the ships and the ports are communicating and align their interests towards that direction. Going out to the regulations, I think addressing the IMO regulations as the short-term measures, we have the first implementation now, 1st of January 2023, the ECSA with the CIIs and the SEMT, and there I have a lot of questions regarding how this will work and whether the weight is calculated, the CII, the AER, the annual emissions ratio, will be something useful for the future or not. And I will explain why, because you have, the formula is very simple. It's total emissions divided by dead weight, not the cargo carried, dead weight multiplied by the distance covered. And in some cases, the shipowner will be forced to sail ballast in order to reduce the CIIs, emitting more, but on the numbers will be better. I think this is something that we need to consider seriously. We, as ECSA or shipowner associations, we are welcoming the earlier implementation of the phase 3. It has been moved from 2025 to 22. I think this will help a lot because all the ships, they have to comply going forward with at least an additional 10% reduction. Going now to the mid-term measures, I think we are all expecting the market-based measure, a carbon levy, which is aligned with the ICS proposal, and we fully support that, and hopefully discussed many times with DG Move or the European Commission. When this coming force, EU ETS may go away because you cannot pay double. But what is now very important for us is the lifetime cycle analysis for the alternative fuels. It is very important because we need to calculate all these alternative fuels from well to wake. And this is the reason we need green alternative fuels. Alternative fuels, if they are black, it's like you charge the battery car from the electricity coming out of fossil fuels. It's exactly the same effect. So it's something that is very important for IMO to proceed very fast for this life cycle analysis. Going now a bit to the EU regulations, I think it's a fact. John, it's a fact. We have to cope with the regulations and we have to contribute as shipowners towards the implementation of both the EU ETS, Fuel EU, and even a lot of other regulations out of the 13 of Fit for 55. What is very important for us is that these regulations are technology neutral. And I think this helps a lot our industry. Having said that, ECSA has been playing a very constructive role towards the Commission and the development of these regulations. And I think we try to help DG Move, DG Climate, and all the other directorates to understand our position, our problematic, the difficulties for implementing the regulations. And I'm glad that we have been having and still have an excellent communication, especially also with Magda. And the aim of ECSA is to create or to at least have these regulations implemented without impacting the competitiveness of the European shipping, first, and second, to maintain the level playing field, which is very important. I'm just concluding very, very quick. For me, Fuel EU is very important. I have doubts how you can start with 2 or even 6 now with the amended proposal and going to 35% of biofuels without changing the engine. I'm an engineer. I know that if you ask the main engine manufacturers, they say yes, but, and I think it's a very, might be a trap for the shipowners. Therefore, we have to look at a little closer. And I share the opinion of John that I think we need shared responsibility with the fuel suppliers. You cannot leave them out because they are those supplying the fuels and they have to issue their necessary certificates and be responsible for what they are doing. I'm very glad that I had, I read recently the report from the rapporteur of Parliamentary Committee Envy, and as a recital includes this responsibility to the suppliers, and I hope that this will come into legislation sooner than later. I will stop here. What is important also, Magda, for us is the multiplier effect for using biofuels. And we set the target for having a multiplier effect of 4. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Philip. I think we'll give Magda the opportunity to reply to all this, but before we do so, if I may ask Guy, I mean, there was quite a lot of discussion about technologies and fuels. Turning to fuels in particular, where do we stand? Is there any kind of, I mean, what needs to be addressed during this implementation stage?
Thank you, Alex, and thank you also to the organisers. It's great to do these panels in the flesh, so to speak, rather than remotely and virtually, although we have good arguments even when it's done that way. But you know, and just before I turn to that as well, is I think there's more that unites us than divides us in terms of that. You know, particularly the regulators and the people who have to comply with the regulation. I mean, you know, we've all got the same shared objective we want to get out of this. It's the methodology of getting there. I mean, and we, you know, fundamentally believe in global regulation rather than regional regulation. I think that's something we've just got to guard against, that we don't have all sorts of different chaos almost by different regions imposing different regulations when we're all trying to achieve the same thing. So I would make that point. We heard this morning some really good presentations, one from ABS actually stuck in my mind, which was the sheer quantities of the new fuels we're going to need. We still don't know yet whether it's going to be ammonia, hydrogen, methanol. The jury's still out, and so ship owners, where they're looking for a 25-year lifespan of a ship, they're having to make real bets now as to what that's likely to be. So we need a lot more research and development still, not so much on whether there'll be engines capable of burning these, but also on the whole infrastructure, the safety case. I mean, you know, ICS is for a market-based measure, a levy-based system is our preference. Absolutely, but we also, in advance of that, and it's not a market-based measure, but something ready to go now, is the industry's proposal for a research and development fund, a $5 billion R&D fund, which will be paid for by a $2 levy on fuel consumed. And that will raise significant sums of money, which can then be used to take the technology readiness levels to a point where it can be implemented, so we can get those zero-carbon ships in service from 2030 onwards, because that's going to be our target if we're actually going to achieve the ambitious 2050 objectives. And we've just shown, we did some work with Ricardo that which has identified over 150 major technical challenges which lie ahead, and over 250 major R&D projects which will need to be undertaken by the proposed fund if these large number of ships are to be in service as well. And I think it's also worth bearing in mind, even if we solve those problems, it is going to be one of supply of the new fuels as well. At the moment, let's face it, we burn a lot of fuels which maybe others don't particularly want. So it's always worked out in our favour. But if it's going to be ammonia or hydrogen, we're going to be competing exactly the same as every other industry. And the figures shown today by ABS just showed what was needed to be produced just to keep the shipping industry going. And so when you take in all the other industries, I think there's a major policy challenge from governments as well. I think conceptually the industry's got it now, what we need to do. But what we also need now is a sense that ambition from governments that they're actually going to be able to produce these fuels, and the infrastructure is going to be in place in order for those investment decisions to be made. I mean, we had a conference in Glasgow at COP26, and you know, a number of ship owners stood up and actually said, we want more regulation, which is highly unusual for a businessman to say. But the reason for that is that's going to de-risk the investments if we know what's coming. But we also need to couple that with the production of the fuels in order to make this happen. So there's a challenge facing our industry, but we can't operate in isolation to what else is going on in the world. So I'm sort of rambling a little bit, but that's effectively it. There needs to be a lot more R&D to get the technology at the right levels. We need to invest in the new fuels, and we need to have some certainty what those new fuels are going to be, and that's going to take a lot of work, a lot of cooperation if we're going to reach the really ambitious targets that we set ourselves.
That's great. Thank you, Guy. And I think I'll give Magda now the opportunity to respond to some of the criticism that we heard from mainly from the owner side. But in addition to that, Magda, if you would like to also tell us how there is a lot of investment cost coming up, obviously, and not only from shipping companies, but also in relation, to ports, and there is lots to be done and a huge cost. So, how would you propose that this cost is apportioned, basically, and apart from the cost, the responsibility as well?
Thank you. You might have seen a couple of minutes ago that I put this paper in the direction of Alexandros asking, so are we going with the question or are we back to discussion? Because what normally happens, I answer and then everybody else answers to me, and that's how this panel hopefully will continue to go for however much time we have. But thank you for giving me the floor first. And I didn't take what I heard as criticism. I took it as questions for considerations. Interestingly, not necessarily new, many of them I've heard before. I thought we have clarified things on several occasions, because indeed we have been having, I think, very, very good and frequent discussions with shipowners associations, but also with individual companies. And just to recall a few things. Principle of technological neutrality, absolutely there, because this is something we have been asked from day one by ship owners, associations. This has to be the case. But of course, technological neutrality means that we don't prescribe any fuel at this moment. So we end up with this fantastic slide from ABS showing all different types of fuels which are possible. And then when we talk to companies will tell us, well, for our segment of shipping, maybe this. For another company or another sector of shipping will tell us, for our sector of shipping, maybe that, which does add to this, on the one hand, more uncertainty and lack of clarity, which for me only stresses what I said before. We need that regulatory framework fast. The faster it's there, the faster you will know what will be needed. And that brings me to the other point that Guy just raised. Indeed, again, slide from ABS showing the huge amounts of alternative fuels that have to be there. But honestly, they don't have to be there, all of them, tomorrow. That was the slide that was showing amounts of fuels that will have to be there if we want to reach decarbonization of shipping industry. But again, for the production of those fuels, testing, and extremely important safety aspects related to those fuels to start being developed and confirmed and agreed upon, we need to know what it is that we are talking about when it comes to regulatory framework. I would love to go into greater details when it comes to Fuel EU, and we could spend the rest of the afternoon talking about that, but I will not. But I actually want to come back to one point, and it is a point that we've been discussing a lot. It's this question of the role of fuel suppliers in the chain of responsibility. Just to recall how Fuel EU is structured at this moment. Ships calling at EU ports will need to demonstrate on an annual basis that they are using cleaner fuels. Cleaner by a certain percentage of greenhouse gas intensity reduction. That percentage starts very low at 2% 2025, going all the way to 75. Thank you. Oh, there you go. I was checking whether they remember. They do. 70. Wait. 75% in 2050. What's happening now with the proposal is discussed in the Council, is discussed in the Parliament, parts of the Parliament, and some EU member states propose higher targets. It's not yet amended. It's not yet agreed. And Commission, when asked, we say we support the proposal we put on the table, especially that we believe it's a system that will need time to be built. So we believe it's a good approach. If in the end Parliament and Council decide otherwise, well, we'll need to see how to adjust to that. Having said that, we discussed a lot before the proposal was put on the table whether we should follow the approach where we will mandate ships calling at EU ports to bunker in the EU ports, and because then we can mandate fuel suppliers. I mean, you would hate us for that. You would hate us for that if we told you that from now on all your bunker needs to come from the EU, and every time you come to the EU, you need to have a way to fill up your tank with fuel bunkers in the EU. It actually doesn't. It wouldn't even work, I think. Of course, I know that it's arranged for aviation, but it's a bit easier for planes because basically they land with nearly empty tank and they tank in every airport where they are. Plus, all of planes use the same fuel. This is not the case for shipping. At the same time, I completely fully agree that we need to have an effective system to guarantee that whatever fuel you will bunker out of the EU, outside the EU, it will be compliant. But I said at the beginning, you will need to report on an annual basis. If you call at EU port once, 2, 3 times a year, everything else that you're going to bunker, you will bunker whatever you like. We will not be able to tell you what you should bunker when you're not trading with EU ports. So we do believe there's a way out. We are working to make sure that there is a certification system in place that will offer you the necessary guarantee to get the right fuel. And we are discussing with the IMO how this question of certification for fuels can be developed, because if we are talking about alternative fuels or fuel standard at the global level, this fuel standard will not work if we don't have a global certification system. And I stop here, but I have many more things, but I will talk bilaterally later. Your question on funding, very important. In a way, for the infrastructure on land, it's a bit easier because we will have a regulatory framework at the EU level where infrastructure for alternative fuels will need to be made available in ports. And there will be funding from national budgets, there will be funding also from European budgets. It gets trickier, I think, when it comes to the global measure. And I think this is a very important element of the discussion that we'll need to have when it comes to global measure. How will we help all countries worldwide to be ready for this forced propulsion revolution or for this decarbonization of shipping, because they will need to invest. And again, I stop here. But I could speak for a long time.
Thank you, Magda. I see that Philippos would like to take...
Thank you, Alexander. Only a minute.
Mm-hmm.
Very, very important for us is that we are requesting the Commission, both on EU ETS and fuel EU penalties, actually, to earn marking all this money in a special sector dedicated fund, and it is in line with actually the rapporteur of the Parliament, Mr. Lise, for the Ocean Fund. The reason we are asking is not only just some money will go to R&D, because R&D is already on the way on many aspects. What is important, in order for incentivize us, the shipowners, to move it to greener fuels, which are multiple priced, we need somebody to bridge the gap of the price difference. And maybe the instrument with the carbon contracts for difference, and maybe new instruments maybe come out from the financial institutions, will help towards that direction. And for us, it's of utmost importance to think seriously on allowing this development of a sector's dedicated fund with enormous amount of this money flowing into that fund. Thank you.
Thank you. I mean, I'm conscious of the time, but it would be useful also to hear your views on collaboration between market participants and between regulators as well. So Arsenio, would you like to give us your view?
Yes, and we're short on time, and I think we can spend the whole afternoon just having a conversation amongst ourselves, and we really enjoy the topic. Another thing that I heard today, one of the presentations, and I hope that I can repeat this, is that 3 Greeks will have 4 opinions. Now, it doesn't apply just that way. Now think about 175 countries having their own opinion in order to actually come into a final solution. But the organization has done it several times. And if you listen to the way that we're talking with each other here, yes, CII, you have a view on it, but as you also mentioned, comes from all the work that has been done more than 10 years ago on the EEDI, so we know where the ships are. And just look at also the, and I hope that I'm not getting in trouble using the word flexibility or the phasing approach, where we are going to keep the CII on the review because we need the experience. But at least it starts guiding us into the right direction. Fuel supply responsibilities is not the first time that we're discussing that at the IMO, but we are all asking for it. Everybody here is mentioning it. We just need to get our heads together into how we're going to do that. And all this goes back into that cooperation that is necessary. Everybody needs to accept, or will have to accept in a way, that there will be sometimes more challenging than others. But all those challenges also provide opportunities. And this is where R&D is necessary. We all keep hearing about the same fields, the scalability. We need those that can actually start putting forward the scalability and that information and the infrastructure to do so, and then cooperate with other countries, other areas in the world, so we have a global approach. So all the pieces are there. The puzzle is not easy to solve. That's where we come in as an organization. And there are times that we're going to be criticized for not acting fast enough, but it's because we need to take into account all the opinions that we have heard here. When we are discussing market-based measures, there are several proposals. We now have 6 proposals on the table. And it comes from all different parts of the world. So we know where we're going. It's how we're going to get there. But we all have the same goal. None of us have really disagreed up here. We may have slightly different opinions on timings, on the formulas, but on how to get there. But we all actually go into the same place. And this is where, if the EU with the MRV started going ahead, IMO caught up with it, we ended up with the data collection systems, so very similar with each other. It has happened before. It can happen again. We just need everyone to keep having that focus on the outcome that we're all aiming at, which is the decarbonization of the industry in the appropriate way, providing that collaboration, that support with each other. And I need to stop because otherwise I will not give the chance to anyone else.
Great, thank you. It's great to see that we all have a common objective. If I may change a bit the subject then, and apart from decarbonization, there is also a lot of regulation on ship recycling, and I don't know if, we have EU regulation at EU level, we have the Hague Convention and so on, the national level. Would anyone like to tell us their views on how this kind of regulation, how do we promote responsible recycling without, again, distorting the market and the level playing field? Yeah, up to you,
Sorry, I take. Okay, speaking on behalf of ECSA, we welcome all these efforts for the ship recycling regulation, because we are aiming for safe, environmental friendly, and also for healthy recycling of the ships. European shipping is committed. We want not to risk any longer lives to take care of the health and take care of the environment. I think the new proposal of European Commission, we welcome this, because now with the waste shipment regulation, we are amending the ship recycling list, and will include also not OECD countries that they are fulfilling the criteria. And we know that there are European companies that they invested heavily in Asia, like in India mainly, and they fulfill the criteria that can be included in this list. What is important is that we need, as Europeans, we cannot escape from the regulation, but we need capacity. And the capacity at this moment is not adequate. And having implementation of all these IMO regulations, etc., we will see in the future increase scrapping activity, because some older technologies may not cope with the CIIs. Very important for us is to have Hong Kong Convention as soon as possible approved, because then will be a very good development for the entire shipping industry.
Great, thank you. Yeah.
And just on a positive note, it is hoped that will come into force next year. So I think we should put some faith into that, and in the Hong Kong, yeah.
Thank you. I think if we have a few minutes left, I think there are a couple of questions. I can see some hands up. So, do we have a microphone perhaps we can use?
Actually, we're 5 minutes late, but I think the topic that you've brought definitely a few more minutes. In favor, short questions, and to the extent possible.
We'll do our best.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, thanks very much for the presentations. I just wanted to ask one question, which I think Phillis is probably on the same pages as me because we're involved with ECSA. I've been involved with ECSA for quite a few years. The question is, are the regulators going to find themselves in a position to be on the same page? We have a problem here where, since Brexit, the English government has got different targets for zero emissions to the IMO. And secondly, just as a reminder, we have to also mention that don't forget the people or concerns who are there to develop all this situation with decarbonisation are, number one, the manufacturers of engines, or the shipbuilders as such, and the engine refineries. Now, this situation is an old story, and I'm very perturbed and very concerned about the fact that I still find that there's a lot of inconsistency with the regulations, and I don't think we're going to go anywhere forward unless we actually align all our ideas on what can be done, and not to forget, last not least, that you cannot build Rome overnight. Thank you.
Thank you very much for this comment. Don't know if anybody would like to comment on this, but...
Only to say that's why we need a global regulation, so that we can take all these different points of view into account and actually come with one consistent regulation going forward, one which there's some certainty about investment, some certainty. And if the global regulation works, if you look at SOLAS, MARPOL, so many different conventions, the Maritime Labour Convention, I'm immensely proud that our industry is the only industry which regulates its workforce through a convention. No other one does. So I think if we can spend the time and we can work together, then we can achieve what's needed to do. But I completely agree that fragmentation is going to do no one any favours.
Thank you. I think I see a couple of more hands up, so...
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. For those of us who are not very proficient in English, I would like to translate properly some of the statements which were made by the panel, especially by my old friend Magda. And Magda, I see we used to meet many, many years ago when you were an austere technocrat in Brussels, but now I see you have also moved to more of a political kind of statement. Otherwise, I just can't explain how you can honestly tell us that the EU is sincerely and honestly cooperating with the IMO. In fact, we all know that this is not the case. And we all know that your dream is that IMO gets nowhere and you will impose your own European policies unilaterally, regionally, and to the great detriment of the shipping industry. And one can speak as much as one wants about the technicalities and how decarbonization will happen and what we have to do and who will invest in what, but I only want to warn about one thing. Those policies which you follow are driving shipping out of Europe. Out of 4 ships that are built today, only 1 comes under European flag. And I fear that if you continue this aggressive policy against shipping, as it is, looking for money and taxes, then we are in great risk to repeat what has happened, what the EU has done to the shipbuilding industry, which 25 years ago was wholesale killed in Europe and sent to the Far East. So this is one point. Now, what will happen henceforth in the development of shipping and in relation with decarbonization? We know what will happen. What will happen is what the big, huge liner companies will dictate. The companies which have made $200 billion profits last year and this year, they are against the operators and the cargo people sharing part of the decarbonization cost. And I'm not sure if there is a slight crack in the unified policy of the European Commission, which repeats and stands behind this very policy. Only the ship has to pay and no one else. Finally, we can talk for ages about technicalities and the indices and how the ships can perform better. We all know that there is medium term, only before we come to the maturity of new technology fuels, we know that there is only one and only one method to reduce drastically CO2 emissions, and this is the reduction of speed. But because everybody is ashamed to call the reduction of speed a reduction of speed, we call it with different other names in the same way as people who are engaged in dubious professions try to use other words. All this talk about engine limitation, consumption limitation, operational measures is only a translation of the word less speed. So, by concluding, I fully agree with what my successor at ECSA, Philippos, has said, what Yannis has said on behalf of the Greek Shipowners Union, what Arsenio from the IMO has said, but I can't agree with the European Union's position, have never agreed, and I am afraid that unless you change course, not the IMO is the world regulator, you are a regional regulator, and therefore the question arises, who will regulate the regional regulators? So, I'm plead with you to rethink your broad strategy. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Laskaridis. Magda, I think the floor is yours.
Thank you. Panels, I think many people in the room do regret now that they haven't heard our previous exchanges, because I think they got a taste of what they could have been in the past. And I have always appreciated the possibility to discuss things with you, although, as probably everybody in the room has realized, we have not always agreed. We agreed occasionally, but not always. And I take your words about moving from a technocrat to a political statement as a compliment, so thank you very much for that. But I can't discuss intentions, because if I tell you that we do want to work with IMO, and we've been a fervent defender of the IMO on many occasions, you would need to take my words for that, because if you think it's differently, then you think it's differently. Having said that, there is a different speed of working, and it is easier if you're smaller to do things. There is a reason why sometimes very small countries move very fast with some very deep-reaching changes, and I will think, for example, digitalization for several countries that transformed completely overnight, while bigger countries or bigger organizations or bodies take time for that. But you referred to the question of number of ships under EU flag. I don't think this number has changed that significantly recently, and more importantly, the way the legislation is structured, it will apply to everybody regardless of flag. So whether you are flagged in EU member state or not, you will be subject to the legislation when you call at EU port. So it's not a question of the flag, it's a question where you're trading, and EU does remain an important trading bloc, and it will remain an important trading bloc where ships will be calling. Again, and I said it on many occasions, and also to ECSA, when you were president, you don't want regional legislation, make sure that the global legislation happens fast. Because I didn't say it at the beginning, but one of the reasons why we had to come up with solutions was that there was this very strong, very clear political mandate from last European Parliament elections that stated We want greening of European economy across all sectors. And if you're asking who's controlling the regional regulator, well, it's actually also you with your elections in the European Parliament, in the Council. We only put things on the table. The ultimate end of that proposal will be determined by the Parliament and the Council. So I'm not overtly concerned with the lack of control. But having said that, and I'm sorry, it will not sound modest, but the fact that we put on the table 2 proposals last July, one for a market-based measure and one for a fuel standard, did influence the discussion in the IMO, because I think, and Arsenio, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think what we are going to have on the table when it comes to the revision of the strategy, hopefully next year, will be actually, again, a basket of measures, a technical measure, like a fuel standard, and a market-based measure. And rest assured that for those 2 measures, we'll be more than happy to work with the IMO. And when I say we, I say the European Commission, but I also know that EU member states who actually sit in the IMO and discuss will also be working to achieve the same objective. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Magda. I think there is one more question, but I don't know if we have time, Nicola. Okay, thank you. Please.
Are we going to have any time soon some replacement of ISO 8217, which is really outdated, allows legally to be contaminated with dioxins and so forth, and I cannot be protected to put on board my ship a really non-contaminated fuel, and this is legal. So I hope your standards actually address that when they come out.
Would you like to? Yeah.
Thank you. We work very closely with ISO, and all the recent press releases are actually put even more pressure on that. And the work that's from the safety aspects that we're actually carrying out on it, it's also connecting out with the environmental regulations. So it is expected within the organization that we actually start already looking into it and what the consequences are, and then see what kind of regulations or agreements we can actually put in place. But it is on the table. It's something that is not going unnoticed at the level of the organization.
Thank you very much for your attention and for all the questions. Thank you.